It's John Willis here. We got Matt Peterson from Cumulus Networks. We're doing kind of a little bit of a video series before the Devops for Networking event on October 14th in Mountain View. And Matt's gang, they were an early sponsor. They kind of saw the opportunity here, and their fearless leader, JR, is going to do our keynote. And welcome, Matt. How you doing?
Great, thanks very much, John. I appreciate the time.
So yeah, totally. Hey, Matt. So tell me, like, what gets you guys excited about this kind of quote unquote DevOps and networking?
That's a great question. I mean, for us, when you look at kind of the direction networking is going today, it's really taking advantage of where compute has gone for the last 2 decades. So you see things like network automation. You'll see things like validated testing designs. Spinning up VMs, whether that's for testing purposes or virtual networks for overlays. So again, a lot of those technologies that have been used on the compute side are finally coming to networking. So we're very excited about enabling that. The company has pretty strong roots in kind of the DevOps space. So I originally started a team here called Customer Engineering, and that's basically both men and women that have been either system administrators or network engineers, but have been able to wear both hats throughout their career. And so we've had that team out in the field building tools for Puppet and Chef and Ansible and other various kind of DevOps tools, if you will. And there's been a lot of great feedback. The community is very excited about being able to, again, use that knowledge and that user base for infrastructure outside of compute. And networking is kind of, I think, ripe for that opportunity.
Now, you guys, so I always tell the story. About a year ago, I kind of got this bug about networking and DevOps, after spending 10 years in compute. And I was at London DevOps Days, and I was literally finishing my presentation, and you guys had a booth right next to me. And I just started chatting to one of your guys, and I apologize for forgetting his name because he was an awesome guy. But and he starts telling me, I'm doing this thing for networking and DevOps. He says, well, that's what we do. I'm like, oh, yeah. And next thing I know, I've got to add like 3 slides to my presentation about you guys. I'm like, holy Mac, this is awesome, So for people who don't know Cumulus, I'll do we can end up, and I'll let Matt tell you kind of the real version. But these guys are real disruptors. If you haven't taken a look at Cumulus, I mean they really have trying to move the whole idea of kind of disaggregating the network operating system from the hardware, where they'll provide you the network operating system. You go choose your own hardware, and it really not just because you're on the podcast here, but it really do. It so fits so well with a DevOps play, so it's pretty exciting. So what got you guys excited about doing the DevOps for Networking event? So,
yeah, another great question there. So, I mean, following up on your original comment about meeting us at events, we've been big proponents of DevOps days and attending Velocity and other events that are kind of specifically focused on, I would say, kind of operations for the full crowd. I think DevOps is a very large and vague term, and sometimes it's abused by recruiters and that sort of thing. So I like to say at the end of the day that we're kind of helping operations or infrastructure teams kind of clue up on some of the technologies out there. So in that particular case, at the DevOps days out in London, I was actually staff in the booth the first day, and I think we originally met there. And I was pretty jet lagged. I only had 2 days in London, so the next day, my peer Nat Morris came down, and he typically lives in kind of the western part of the country in Wales, but he came down to London to staff the booth. And I think Nat kind of represents exactly what we see kind of DevOps for networking targeted as, is that Nat had done a lot of consulting for large enterprises and smaller businesses, and basically used kind of his, I guess you could say, tinkering or kind of maker sensibilities and applied it towards his job, right? So he would be configuring traditional Cisco gear or traditional Extreme gear, that sort of thing, but he would write scripts to generate the configs, or he would take diagrams and convert the diagrams into different topology documents. So like we have a technology called PTM that utilizes GraphViz dot files.
Awesome.
That's something that's been around for 30 years. It came out of AT&T Bell Labs. So again, I think that the marriage of these compute technologies now being applicable to the networking space is really powerful. So the thing I like about this event is that you've got kind of traditional networking vendors, and then you've got startups like us. So you've got kind of both gamuts there. And I think what's great about kind of this revolution is that both of those extremes, whether you call one the right and one the left or vice versa, both of those extremes are kind of, at this point, acknowledging that open and scalable and easy to understand automation is key. Because if you've looked at networking in the last 10 to 20 years, they've had automation solutions, they've had scripting solutions, but they were typically proprietary, they were typically single vendor, typically expensive, or a lot of times, it's arcane scripting languages that the system administrators or your DevOps engineers don't know. I think Tickle's a great example of that. If you grew up 15 years ago, Tickle was great. You were doing, X11 apps, and you were like writing IRC bots, and it was good times. But now we're in a generation where, scripting languages like, Ruby or Perl or Python, those kind of easy to use scripting languages, those are just assumed kind of industry standards at this point. And so I think if you can have networking devices that, again, utilize that knowledge that already exists, it's really powerful. So for me personally, and certainly for JR to be president of DevOps for Networks, the thing that's great about it is to see folks, like Jeremy, that used to be at Juniper for a long time, and is now actually spun off his own company to build automation tools that's hopefully going to be, vendor agnostic. I think that's a really powerful message. Someone coming from a traditional incumbent realizing that there's even another level of abstraction that can be done, I think is really exciting. Myself, I've gone on this path for some time. I don't do a lot of marketing and pitching of my own brand, but I was employee number 8 at Square, a little payment.
Oh, wow.
So we put a lot of automation infrastructure there. So we treated the network and all of our operation systems, whether that was LDAP and logging systems, or that was our BGP and appearing sessions. We treated them the same, right? There's automation that goes around it. There's monitoring that goes around it. There's maintenance windows. We would do a change log. We'd do a wiki page of, we're going to change this. And all the engineers, anyone in the company could see what we were doing. So it's kind of high visibility. And I continued that trend at Tumblr. So I built their network and data center when they migrated out of a private cloud provider. Same thing, where we're using that same automation approach on compute applied to networking. So in both those organizations, I never hired a network engineer. Right? I hired traditional sysadmins. I taught them routing protocols, and they treated it like any other project where they, monitored it, they maintained it, they automated it, and then moved on. And I think that's becoming the norm for a lot of organizations where they see the network as being obviously critical, but they're treating it as a utility. Just as like databases and storage was seen as very separate silos, those are coming into the fold as kind of unified infrastructure. And I think networking is kind of the last holdout. Yep. So going back to your original question, sorry to loop around here, but I think the original question is, why are we excited about this event? Is that it goes exactly to who we're targeting for. You'll be at events like DevOps Days or Velocity, where you have strong systems folks that know a lot about monitoring and automation and build systems, but 90% of them are in the cloud, right? And so they don't run their own network. And when they do graduate out and they need their own infrastructure, then it's very applicable. So an event like this that's very targeted for basically people that already get it, if you will, or are interested in kind of the movement, but are trying to solve the networking problem, it's almost 100% of our ideal user.
No, it's great. And for those of you who haven't met Matt, I got to hang out with Matt a couple of times, and he's the real deal. If you hadn't picked that up already, and you hit on a point that I think is pretty awesome. And I've had a lot of discussions with Jeremy. I'm going to get a video with him, Jeremy Schulman. He's got an interesting project called Sprockets now. But the thing is the nice thing about this event, if you've ever been to a DevOps and you're a systems person, and we're going to focus on kind of DevOps and networking. So like Matt said, there might be, we're going to do a traditional format. We'll do kind of speakers in the morning and open space in the afternoon. So somebody like Matt might be in a session talking about, like he just said, he hires people at some of his companies and that are sysadmin guys, and then teaches them router protocols. So we're going to have a very network-centric afternoon where we might do some hackathons, and you're going to get, if you're a systems person and you're kind of excited about SDN or bare metal switches or what Cumulus is doing, you're going to get an opportunity to really, and it might be that some of that stuff you've forgotten because you've been in the cloud for 4 years, and maybe just kind of dust off those cobwebs. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be a network focus, but we're going to roll up our sleeves with things like Ruby and Python, and pull out some Chef and Puppet, and so I mean, like I said, it's going to be a good time. So
it's going to be great. Yeah, I'm really excited because I think, like you said, I mean, the fact that you're getting kind of network operators that are interested in automation, they don't have to be convinced of the benefits. It's just kind of obvious to go in that direction. I think it's going to be great. One of the things I'm hoping to speak about potentially at Lightning Talk is the Burning Man network that I helped build.
Oh, yeah, totally, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting network. I mean, the event itself, obviously, people have their strong opinions on whether it's a festival or a rave or a party or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's 70,000 people in the desert. You have to have a network for that to function logistically. And so we've been doing a lot of automation for, I'd say, probably the past 6 years, where we have an infrastructure that basically you define your VLANs, your IP addresses, and that controls basically generating configs for switches, routers, wireless radios, forward and reverse DNS, smoke ping, MRTG, Nagios, all those sorts of things. It does it when you literally type in make. And so for me, I'm trying to convert that to something like Ansible, where I think Ansible is interesting because it doesn't require an agent. And so we have a lot of devices that we bought several years ago, and the manufacturers have not said that they would support Puppet or Chef. And so Ansible is one option. And so to me, that's really exciting to be able to present something like that, again, potentially, that talks a little bit about, here's an actual use case. But I think part of the challenge with the community around DevOps is that there's 98% evangelism and 2% reality. And so I think it's great when people talk about, here's how you should do your day-to-day job, or here's some infrastructure you should put in place. But it's much more interesting when you say, here's some lessons actually learned, and here's what we did, and take that forward. So we've gone through a lot of iterations there, and just basic things like saying, okay, well, do we put everything in a VLAN tag? Well, that's great. It makes the configuration very consistent, but then you lose things like, say, LLDP, because LLDP doesn't typically work when it's in a VLAN tag or any sort of a tunnel. So you have trade-offs between, well, it's easier on the automation front, but then from a debugging standpoint, you lose something. And so we've had to go through these kind of iterative steps over the years to kind of checks and balances. So I'm actually pretty excited about the event to learn how other people have gone through that iteration. Because if you look at a lot of people that use a Puppet or a Chef or any sort of automation tool and compute, the ones that are the most successful treat it like a software project. Every 6 months they come back in and they say, hey, let's refactor this. Why didn't we use parameterized classes? Or why didn't we use an external ENC? Or whatever the case may be. And they treat it like software. And I think that the network automation is going to be the same way, where you'll come back and say, wow, not everything needs to be encapsulated in VLAN. Let's break this off. Or, oh, we have to support this new model of hardware. The syntax is a little bit different. Let's refactor this template, et cetera. So I'm really excited to hear about kind of those lessons learned.
Yeah. So Matt's our first. We're going to do a call for papers, hopefully this week. But Matt's already kind of submitted, so we've got him all queued up. And like I said, it's going to be a great time. It's October 14th, Computer History Museum in Mountain View, and I can't wait to hang out with you, maybe learn a little bit more about router protocols, my friend.
Appreciate it, John. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Matt.